Who doesn't love a vintage kit? I mean, after all, sometimes they have very interesting subjects and hark back to that sort of nostalgia of building something when we were younger. However, they aren't always good quality kits. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and join me on the workbench for part 2 of my Airfix Dogfight Doubles, Fokker DR.1 and Bristol F.2B. I've already built the Fokker. So that means in this episode I'm going to be working on the Bristol F.2B, and if you've already seen the Fokker video you'll probably know where this one's about to go. But anyways, without any further ado, let's get this down on the workbench. For a more detailed look inside the box, check out the dedicated unboxing video I've already made on this particular topic. In this video I'm going to be focusing on building the second aircraft in this set, the Bristol F.2B, and seeing what it's like and rounding off the video with a review at the end. I'll put a list of the products I used on the screen now to give you an idea of the kind of things you might want to go and get if you fancy having a go at something like this for yourself. The first step is to remove all of the plastic parts that I'm going to need from their relevant bits of sprue using my side cutters or perhaps a sharp knife. It'll be no surprise that given the age of this tooling, it does suffer from excess flash in places and some ejector pin marks that may need to be cleaned up. Fortunately though, as this kit comes with a display stand included, I do actually want to display it on that stand. So in order to facilitate this, I'm going to cut out the slot in the bottom of the aircraft. And as mentioned, there are some ejector pin marks that need a bit of attention. To address these, I'm going to fill them with some Ammo MIG putty surfacer. This was brushed into the relevant areas and allowed to dry. I would then go and sand these areas down to try and hide the fact that there were ejector pin marks there. This, as you can imagine, was a very tedious and boring step, and not one of my favourite things about model making. With all the parts tidied up, it was time to join the two fuselage halves together. This is relatively straightforward, and actually I'm surprised by how well they fit. There is a bit of a seam though, and that will need to be addressed. Again, a little bit of the putty surfacer was added into these seams, and then they were sanded as smooth as I could get them. On the nose of the aircraft is an engine representation. This kit can actually have the prop freely rotate if you follow the instructions. However, I'm just going to glue the prop on at the end, but you would have to add it here with a retaining pin if you wanted that functionality. The tail skid was added to the back of the fuselage, and then it was time to prime. I'm going to be using this Tamiya Fine Surface Primer in grey. This was sprayed onto all of the parts which are either assembled or awaiting being included in the build. A couple of thin coats should help make sure all of the paint that I'm about to apply sticks to the surface. And speaking of paint, the first one I'm going to use is this gold. This was painted onto the nose of the model, as there is a kind of gold or brass-like band that I will have to mask. And when that was masked, I used a little bit more of the grey primer. There are some bits on the nose which need to stay grey. After this, Humbrol number 155, which is an olive drab, was used on the fuselage and the upper wing surfaces. You can see that I've masked the areas on the nose of the aircraft that I want to remain grey. For the lower surfaces of the aircraft, I'm going to use this Tamiya XF78 wooden deck tan. I would actually thin this down with some Tamiya X20A thinner to help it flow better through the airbrush. This was then carefully applied to the lower surfaces of the wings and tail surfaces, and I would also add some to the hubs of the wheels. With that painting complete, it's time to remove the masking on my fuselage. And now I'm going to move on to some metal work. This gunmetal paint was used to pick out the engine exhausts on the side of the aircraft, as well as the radiator on the front, and a few other little bits and pieces. Humbrol 110, which is a natural wood colour, was painted onto the propeller. And the wing support struts as well. Vallejo Black was carefully painted onto the tyres on the wheels. Whilst I have been using Tamiya extra thin cement throughout most of this build, I am actually going to swap out to some Humbrol poly cement here. This glue is a little bit thicker, it's a bit more like a gel, and I'm hoping it'll be a little bit more aggressive and help make sure that the wing support struts and other bits and pieces kind of stay in the right place as the glue cures. With this in mind, I added the main fuselage onto the lower wing, the tail surfaces onto the back of the plane, and the engine exhaust pipes onto the side of the fuselage. And now come those struts. Each strut is an individual part and was a little bit fiddly to get in the right sort of place. You need to make sure that all the angles of these struts are perfectly aligned, because otherwise you're going to struggle to get the top wing in place. And speaking of the top wing, this was a little bit fiddly, trying to get everything aligned, and it did take a bit of a while to get it right. So actually I spent quite a lot of time doing this, and some of it I did off camera, but with some patience it is possible to get it more or less looking about right. With that done, I added the landing gear support struts. This again was a little bit fiddly, and the main struts actually have to pass through the lower wing. And whilst I was building this up, I discovered that the sort of cross brace doesn't quite fit through the holes. So I had to get out my small drill bit and run that through the holes to clear them out a little bit so that this could actually fit. When that was done, I could add that part, and then I glued into place the wheels, making sure to get them vertical as they were a little bit wobbly to pop on. Now I'm going to clear coat the model. This Humbrol 135 satin varnish should give it a uniform and smooth surface in preparation for the decals. And speaking of the decals, here they are. This is all that's left over, with the rest of the sheet having previously been used on the Fokker DR.1. They are printed by Cartograph and to a nice quality. I simply dipped the entire sheet into some warm water to help release them from the backing paper. As a side note, if you'd like to get your hands on your own brushwater mug so you don't mix it up with your cup of tea, check out my merch store. As is quite typical with my builds, I'm going to be using microscale set and sol as my decal fluids in this project. Micro set from the blue bottle will be brushed onto the relevant areas where the transfers are going to go. The transfers were then slid off the backing paper and into position. After a little bit of time, some micro sol from the red bottle can be added on top to soften them further into the plastic. The decal application process was relatively straightforward. The decals are to a lovely quality, and I found that they settled down into the surface really nicely. The benefit, of course, this kit doesn't come with that many transfers, and they are of a manageable size. And when those decals had been applied and left to cure, I would then clear coat them with some more of that acrylic satin varnish. This will seal them in and help protect them from any rough handling. So a lot of you probably know that I don't really enjoy doing biplanes or aircraft that require rigging. I just find rigging so tedious, but a lot of people did say, come on, give it a go, have a go at some rigging. So I did have a go at some rigging on this one. In order to do the rigging, I've actually got some of this super fine Infini black lycra. My process here was to cut it into kind of lengths and then apply a little bit of super glue where I wanted to start the rigging going. I would then sort of tie it in that position, it would be glued on, and then I would run the rigging to the next location that it needed to go. When I do rig biplanes, I try and do it so that the rigging is like one continuous piece and it just zigzags around the different sort of struts. But this was incredibly fiddly. This was some of the finest rigging lycra that I've got, and even like the smallest amount of wind would blow it away. So I did a little bit of this off camera, and it did take quite a bit of time. It wasn't the worst experience, but it kind of reinforced to me why I don't really enjoy doing rigging. I think though with that done, it does make it look a little bit better, a little bit more realistic, and I hope that this extra work was worth it. Towards the back of the aircraft, I still need to add on the gunner's machine gun, and this was a little bit fiddly to get into place as well, because you kind of have to squeeze the part together to get it to then pop into place. After a while, I did manage to do that. Technically, this does have play value and could technically elevate, but I'm not too fussed about that. The prop which I painted earlier was then glued onto the nose. And now I need to turn my attention to the two included figures. Sadly, they only come as half figures, as that's how they've been designed, and I doubt that they would fit in the aircraft if they had legs. These were primed previously, and all I need to do now is paint them. First up, some Tamiya flat flesh was used on their faces. Then Humbrol 62 leather was painted onto their flying helmet and their gloves. Humbrol 110 natural wood makes a kind of appropriate flight jacket colour, so that's what I used it for. Vallejo buff was used to highlight the fluffy collars on these figures. When all of that was dry, I went over the top with some sepia shade game wash from Vallejo. This should help run into all the recessed details and add a little bit of shade and contrast. When that was dry, I got out this Humbrol No. 1 Primer Grey and did a little bit of dry brushing to further highlight the raised details. I did this for both of the figures, and when they were completely dry and ready to go, they were carefully glued into the relevant positions on the aircraft. The final thing to do is assemble the included display stand, and it's actually really nice that Airfix have included display stands in this kit. Granted, it's not the traditional A-frame display stand that came with Dogfight Doubles, but any display stand is better than no display stand. So with that assembled, I then added onto the top the aircraft itself. And with that, I'm calling my build of the Bristol F.2B in 1/72nd scale complete. And there we have it. My Airfix, Fokker DR.1 and Bristol F.2B Dogfight Doubles set are now complete. So looking back on this kit, I didn't completely hate it. There were some enjoyable aspects of it, and it was interesting, figuring out which bits need to be painted before which other bits, because with upper and lower wing surfaces and struts, you kind of have to break it down into sub-assemblies and then assemble it when it's kind of painted. So yeah, it was interesting figuring out a workflow for that. The good things about this kit, I think, are the fact that you get two included kits. You get the Fokker DR.1 and the Bristol F.2B, and at the time that I bought this kit, it was retailing for £10.99. So two kits for £10.99. That's a pretty good deal. The decals are printed to a really nice quality as well, and we did actually have colour painting instructions inside the box, which makes it so much easier to know what you're actually doing. And included display stands and figures. So, back in the day, they kind of knew what extra value to include in kits. Nowadays, not all kits come with display stands or figures. On the flip side though, this is a 1957 tooling, and with that in mind, we've seen seam marks, we've seen ejector pins that had to be cleaned up. Some fit in a few places was a bit weird, but with some work, and in my case it was considerable work, you can build it up into a fairly nice representation of the aircraft. It is completely obvious that this is not up to today's standards, which is why it makes sense that it be in a Vintage Classics boxing. And of course, Airfix do indeed tell you on the box what the age of the kit is, so you go into this product with your expectations completely managed. On a personal note, I found that perhaps the hole in the bottom I'd made for the display stand was a little bit too big, so it was a little bit wobbly on the display stand, so I'll just have to keep that in mind for future builds. But I am a little bit glad that I had a go at the rigging. I think the rigging on this one actually elevates the build. I did add a little bit of rigging to the Fokker DR.1 as well, but on this one it's naturally much more complicated. I have done almost like simplified rigging, but I think it does sort of pull the build up a little bit more and give it a little bit of extra realism. So I am glad I've done it, but I did find it incredibly tedious. I do keep a note of everything that I do in my builds in my modeller's journal, and this is just a little diary where I keep note of everything that I do. And if you would like to keep note of what you do with your builds, you can get these on Amazon and it helps support the channel. But in here, this one took me about just under 2 weeks to complete. So in between other commitments. It was a little bit time consuming having to do the rigging and the filling and the sanding, and that's one of the main things I've picked up on here. Lots of filling and sanding, and the rigging was a bit of a pain. However, the decals are great, the figures are included, and you get a display stand. And all of that for £10.99, 2 kits in the box. Not too bad in my opinion. If I did have one small gripe, it would be that whilst this is a Dogfight double, technically the 2 aircraft included in this set would never have seen combat against each other. One was based in the UK and would never have seen the other one, which was operating over the trenches in the First World War. So slightly odd choice that they put these 2 together, but perhaps they didn't have any other appropriate subjects. I do ask myself sometimes, would I consider buying this kit again in the future? In this case, whilst there were some positives, I think I'm probably going to skip that. But I am glad that I have had the opportunity and experienced this one at least once. And with that, I'm going to call this video here. Let me know down in the comments what do you think of my build and whether my review of this kit was fair. Quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them and become a member of the Model Club and find out what the perks are that you would get by being a Model Club member, check out the links in the description. Of course, if you don't want to become a Model Club member, there are other ways to help support the channel, and again, full information is below the video. If, however, you enjoyed this one and you'd love to see more content like this, please subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, from me on the workbench today, the last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. Right, good. What are we doing? Right, Bristol F.2B. Not too loud, that's good. Been a while since I've done a face-to-camera video. Life has been very busy. And now I realise I probably don't have enough space on the computer for this to save. Oh. Just as well I put that on there. I wouldn't want to take a drink out of that.